why we can't just live in that moment of like the unexpected. Like we are, to a fault, sometimes planning things so much, we forget to be present.
Welcome back, listeners, to the Integrated Being podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, I am your co-host, Dr. Elizabeth Cook, and I'm here again with the co-host and my favorite pediatrician with over 35 years experience, Dr. Keith Summers. Today, we're diving into something that on the surface sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but somehow with everything in life, we have complicated it. So really the idea of like feeding ourselves and our children, common sense, and then reflecting on, really the topic that brought us together is the whole phenomenon of whole food, plant-based diets. So welcome,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Summers.
It's always great to be here, Dr. Cook. And yeah, I mean, I think our whole podcast name, Illuminating Being, says it all, shining a light on this sort of story. And it's a story with great historical perspectives that, we're evolving, and as is our diet evolving. Michael Pollan probably states the most common sense, simplest term of eat food, not too much, mostly plants, right? So that's sort of a guiding principle that I've sort of taken hold of when it comes to the common sense nature of how we should look towards eating. And sort of that's probably in the last 10 or 15 years that sort of, I think food has sort of become, it's always been an object of our obsessions, right? Of like, what do we do? And the food industry has certainly identified that, and marketing, like anything, speaks to some nerve it hits. And I think our previous, you know, um, few sessions on the senses sort of captures the whole process of what happens to us in a day to day. And now we are inundated with so much information, so much
Right.
marketing. I mean, our kids, I remember growing up, I mean, Tony the Tiger, Snap, Crackle, Pop. I mean, all of these sort of foods were capturing you know, the kid's imagination. Like, oh, I want that, right? So broccoli, carrots, sweet potatoes, they don't really have a great marketing campaign, right?
Right. So I think in this episode, we just really want to reconnect ourselves and our listeners with the power of common sense and nutrition, explore the diet, and I think, offer in one area, right? Like, because of all the mass information, I find, in my journeys, there's a space of fear, there's a space of like maybe even like shame of like not having access to or understanding of, or like don't know how to ask the questions. And so, with life being so busy, you just kind of over analyze. And then there's this idea of perfection, like of how to feed the child. And then that becomes, or yourself. So we're going to break it down. So you've seen in your time, serving your families and helping, the trends that come and go. So just what's one thing, I know you have many, so you could probably do a couple, but like you wish more families would come back to when it comes to nutrition?
I think two things to highlight would be family meals and cooking your own meals, right? Sort of food preparation. Um, we are, if nothing else, a society, and the American way is sort of on expediency, ease of access, but basically, I was just reading something earlier, just, we're workaholics, right? So and I think Elizabeth, you sort of are sort of a poster person for this, that you have a great career, but as a mother, most of cooking and preparation falls to mothers, right? So um, there isn't a divide and conquer completely. There are certainly a lot of dads who are interested in cooking, who are very good at cooking, but a lot of what ends up happening for our kids is determined by what the mothers are doing. And so mothers are great managers. That's one thing I can say, that I you have to do a lot of things, right? You have to house in order, get the people fed, a lot of things. And I don't say we take it for granted, but they don't get a lot of, you know, adequate kudos for what they've learned to do, managed to do, on the backdrop of society sort of having this lens of like critiquing everything that's going on.
Right. And just since you brought the topic up, like one of my big reasons to start my original blog and podcast, Integrated Being, was this like mommy martyr culture that I found myself like evolving around me. Like I started my career when I like first had babies, got married. So like I've been in all worlds since the moment I started. So I never actually looked at anything other than like one day at a time is what I used to tell people for 10 years. But I found almost every business trip I went into, every meeting that someone introduced, I never gave the information that I had children and I was in that position. They'd be like, "How do you do it?" So it was this collective thought of like so many people asked, "How do you do it?" And I'll just say now we're like trending on this like mental load that us mothers have, and I think I would love to change the conversation because if you are aware of all of this and you have the common sense, it's all about understanding it takes a village, it takes a
Right.
community, the loved ones that are around you. You find the people that have the skill sets, you have the open communication with your partner. If it's a male, like the whole segmentation of the male female kind of dissolves and becomes not even something to discuss, which that I've been blessed that have a partner like that. But it is true, like our brains, from an evolutionary perspective, we were the ones that were like creating life, formulating the foods, the medicinal aspects of plants, and understanding like how
Yeah.
the world's created, where the men in our lives were very single pointed, surveying the land, keeping the predators out, staying focused on, have not being eaten, to go back to the way times. But so I think it's a beautiful space, and I think the realization that those roles have always existed in a way because of how like we're from the hormonal
Right.
perspective and all of the things.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of common sense to it, right? Like we like to
Almost.
overcomplicate it when fundamentally like there's ways that we're good at and there's things we're not good at, and how do you like create
Right.
teams
Well,
to
right.
drive?
I think it's collaboration, right? And I think we've created sort of pseudo collaborative spaces. And now we have consultants telling everybody how to do things, right? So, and there's a space for that, but it sort of distracts and takes away from what can be common sense. I mean, a group could work very well just by getting to know each other without having a consultant come in and tell you the 10 things that you need to perform in order to make your team work the best, right?
Right.
And so I think you speak eloquently about these sort of things. You're passionate about it, and I think the question is, how do we lift up others to get to the same place? Because it's not a magic sort of thing to do, but it does take a space where you're sort of honored and respected and trusted to do that, and there's give and take, um, and life is messy, right? It's
Right.
the bottom line. So I think we have to and I think the other thing you spoke to, which my other great sort of read and person that I really have sort of aspired to is Brene Brown and sort of removing shame and blame, right? So I think we've created a huge society where we are shaming and blaming people, looking for perfection. And the one thing I know about humanity is that we are not perfect,
Right.
nor should we aspire to be perfect. We should, I think, aspire to be better, right? So to me, better is the space that we want to get to, not perfection.
So your advice is family meals, which, within this world of like constant go, 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 that might like go over a few listeners' heads, like, I don't have time for those. And I'll just say, activities and after school activities and travel schedules, I've simplified, aka I'm not gonna be perfect. I'm not gonna be shameful for the schedules that we do have, but having at least one a week is a goal, if not two. And, like, I have a grown children, so they're not in activities, they're actually working, so it's just finding that time, and then no matter who's home, don't make a production out of it. It's just this like, let's sit together and eat. Um, but anyway, it's like it's flexible, but just the awareness of the power of those meals, I think, is really important. And then the other one you said, just so we didn't lose it, was cook your own meals. Oh, yeah.
Right. No, I think that's, and, I think those who grew up with grandmothers for the most part, and if you spent time in the kitchen with grandma, I mean, she didn't have a cookbook. I mean, she sort of whizzed around the kitchen and threw this, that, and the third thing in there. And at the end of the day, you sat down for this meal. Um, Interesting, I was reading a mechanical engineer from Stanford who has this quotient consulting group that looked at what is a meal and sort of surveyed people to find out what meals actually are. And discovered, I think, sort of like the family meal, that the time spent at mealtime has decreased. And this was between maybe the 70s or 80s and 90s by 20% or something, and that it's diminishing. And what's another space that we've sort of alluded to in past is been taken over by what Americans sort of have gone to is snacking, right? So snacking has become the new meal, right? We're eating on the go all the time rather than sitting down and having meals, be that at home or at work or whatever. So, um, which is, just not what the rest of the world does. I mean, if you go to Europe, the siesta, the Spanish, I mean, we sort of like, we may be more productive, we're more creative, at least we think we are in this realm because we're sort of driven. Um, we are the only country in the world, I was just reading this, we've talked to this too, that does not mandate parental leave after birth,
Which is, huh.
which is abysmal and is a reflection on what part of our value system. And we think we have these great values, but I think if we don't start by valuing mothers, fathers, children, and from the very get-go, then how do we expect to sort of like, surmount some of our problems? Because we just create other layers of challenges for them. That being said, I feel like there's a lot of reasons for us to be hopeful because that's why we're here. We're here to sort of share what the opportunities are for, despite, a lack of a society moving forward in some respects, to sort of help the underpinnings of, creating a better society here in America. We can still chip away at some of that because individually we can do it, even if, we don't have our government sort of supporting that.
And like, and I think it's about, there was a book. Look, us reading all these books is, the types of wealth, 5 types of wealth, and one of them is like the time, right? Having avail awareness of where your time goes and how your time is being utilized, and that in itself, I find with all of my engagements and inner workings with others, is not a whole lot of people have full awareness of where they're spending their time. So the whole saying, I don't have time, right? And so when we talk about what we're talking about, just a common sense, there is a moment, that you make it clear in your mind that a family meal, be it, with your children, is what it is. Like, don't make it a production and ground yourself in that. And then the other one, common sense, is like, there's a lot that can happen in those 15, 20 minutes of preparing the meals together that can be a part of the family meal, right? So just like making that
Right. Well, I
thought
think
and plant a lot of good.
plant some seeds, plant a lot of good. And I think it's just the communal time spent together. So you may laugh, you may spill something, things are going to
Don't
happen.
don't yell over spilled milk. Make that
Yeah,
work.
exactly. But, why, we can't just live in that moment of like the unexpected. Like we are, to a fault, sometimes planning things so much, we forget to be present, right? So I think a lot of what this is about in the common sense world is being present. There's a mindfulness center that sort of said a few things about what mindful eating is. And I think I wrote down a few quotes here. I'll have to find them. But anyway, it's just sort of having awareness, participating, being present. And I think those are a few of the things that family meals sort of help to engender is that, don't have your phones, turn them off, like don't have distractions, and we are in a crazy time of distraction right
Yeah.
now.
Just that awareness.
Right, right. So I think, and taking our time. I mean, I think just a statistic that sort of blew me away a number of years ago when I discovered it is, the amount of time we're spending as a family and meals is less. The average time that kids get for lunch at school, give me a guess. What do you think that might be?
Well, I mean, I kind of have kids. So I would say 20,
That's
25
close,
minutes.
17 minutes.
Oh, I was
That's the
going to
amount of
say,
time. I mean, who can eat in 17 minutes, let alone get there, sit down, have a conversation with your friends?
actually, like, I remember getting a note where, like, for my younger children, please pack things that they can open, make it easily accessible because we don't have time. And I'm like, and then also, and I mean, it didn't say that, but that's what it was
You were thinking
implying.
it, yes.
And then even when I pack my son, like, the apple and the banana, and a salmon, he's like, I don't have time to eat that. And it's like, well, you don't throw it away, do you? And he's like, so, I'm kind of like stuck in rock and a hard spot.
Whereas in France, I forget, I think it was Michael Moore, I think, did a whole expose, and they went to France, and basically they have a formal lunch. They sit down, they set the table, china, and they all engage in that, right? And so I think, we think that we have to just get it done. And I think it goes to like the 40-hour work week is sort of what typically happens in most places of the world. I mean, you do have some countries like Japan and some Korea and here where we're working 60 or 80 hours a week, right? And the value of like taking a vacation, if you take your vacation, there's something, all of it, there might be something wrong with you, right? Why are you taking so much time off? But it's sort of when you get to regroup and refresh, right? So going on those walks, being in nature gives you the space to sort of like, oh, come up with the idea maybe that's going to solve your problem. Whereas when you're constantly trying to solve the problem, you spin your wheels and then you get burned out.
Oh, just because you brought up Japan, I remember reading an article that every school has a hired nutritionist that actually is a teacher. So they go 3 years longer than their teachers do. And they make all of the food from scratch. Anyway, okay. um, so another area we want to touch, which is kind of common sense, and you quoted, our favorite gentleman, Campbell, behind you, but whole food, plant-based diet. So let's just clarify for ourselves and our listeners, what are we talking about when we say
So
those
basically,
words?
yeah, those words I think speak to the fact that we're eating things that are in their original form, minimally processed, right? So cooking was sort of one of the evolutionary things that changed once we got heat and we're able to sort of do that with our food. So, and certainly there are some benefits. Some foods, are more accessible once they're heated. So whether it's boiling them, whether it's grilling them and things like that. But the whole food, plant-based sort of origins, which it's interesting in the early 80s, he sort of coined that phrase. I mean, now it's everywhere, right? So we are part of acronyms. We're part of this catchy phrase society of like what's going to sell things, right? And at the end of the day, it's also another marketing tool. But he wasn't looking at marketing things. He basically was a nutritional chemist, and ended up at Cornell. And one of the things he discovered in his early work when he was at, I think, Virginia Tech, they did a study out in the Philippines, and there's something called aflatoxin, which was found to be sort of a common sort of precursor, instigator to liver cancer. And the rates of liver cancer were higher in kids that ended up having high protein diets, but high protein diets that were sort of more affluent. So you saw a disproportionate number of these cancers. And so that sort of spurred him on to this whole pursuit of wanting to find about protein. And he grew up on a farm, drinking milk, very much, in the American way. And I think he sort of moved into this sort of wanting to understand the basis of nutrition on the chemical side. Um, and we've gotten to the point where I think he's sort of looks at the whole, right? If you eat a whole piece of fruit, there are a few identifiable vitamins and minerals and all sorts of things. And then there are probably hundreds of thousands of things we may never identify. But how they all work together make that food, the beneficial, sort of transit point to give us nutrition. Whereas we are in a reductionist mode where you want your protein, we'll we'll give you a protein powder. You want your calcium, we'll do this. So, but at the end of the day, we can't build a diet on single elements as well as the whole foods will deliver, because they deliver beyond. And if we do look, I mean, just historically, it's interesting. As far back as Pythagorean, he became a vegetarian. So there was already vegetarianism happening in those early times. They had discovered, not necessarily to the point that it was impacting health, but they would sometimes feel better, right? And also that became sort of a religiosity behind some of these sort of things and not wanting to do harm to animals and things like that. But I think over time, we found that, eating meat was not, we think of that very much because we go to a butcher and we have all this access, but that's not what existed. There wasn't a way to keep things fresh and safe. And on top of that, you had to catch the darn thing, right?
Right.
And
So
that was
there's
so
time and
we're gonna cover a
stress.
whole lot of things, but the evolution of the diet is basically we had hunters and gatherers, and the hunters were not very successful most of the time. And so the gatherers were the mothers. And they were foragers. So what did they forage? They found plants, because that was what was there, and the plants have all the proteins and the nutrients, right? So I think that's where sort of part of the underpinning of the whole food plant-based diet sort of really comes to more of the fore, right? Where we're sort of trying to get some science to underpin why this diet will be more beneficial. And I think,
Right, and, like, even in the process of, like, desiring the science to confirm and stake it in your findings, you lose the whole thread of what we just spoke about is, like, common sense, like, and then even, like, understanding that when you put something on your body or in your body, like, your awareness of how you feel and respond to that is something that we've gotten far from. It was like we've just, like, taken this, like, thought or lineage of thought based on the last few generations, because that's where our learnings come from, and programmed us like to not realize that when you consume something, so like, a big part of whole food plant-based, I think, is just a ground in the common sense. And it's not veganism, it's not perfectionism, it's really just choosing foods close to their natural form and being aware and being flexible that, there is room to make food joyful. You don't have to like eradicate all the good stuff, right? Like you just redefine what's good and what makes you feel good. So it's not about fear or exclusion, right?
right,
It's really just like
right,
genuinely like back
right.
to basics.
Right.
So
I mean, I think, it gets back to our whole lead into all this was about our senses. And right. So eating is not just about looking at food and going to consume it, right? There's the aromas, there's the textures, there's all of that is part of the eating, experience. And, something may be sweet or to me may not be as sweet to you, vice versa. I mean, our tastes and things are very unique to us individually. We've sort of like we've glamorized food to some degree. We've made things easier for access, but I think, getting down to the basics, like you said, common sense and trying to find a way to access that. Now,
which
that being said,
yeah,
is our next point of like,
yeah.
what's available to everybody is not. And
How can
that's
we
where
make this a reality for families who may be in what are they, food deserts
food
or
deserts, right?
limited time, whatever they want to, whatever,
Right.
I know this is an area you sit in, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think, we sort of like so many things, we make assumptions. And I think just to assume because you have more money or you live in a certain area that you don't know about this stuff is totally wrong. I mean, I don't begin to believe that any of my patients have more or less knowledge because of where they live, because that's just the wrong assumption. That access to food
Right,
maybe
access.
determine determining what they eat and, you know, what's available. I mean, there may not be a supermarket. Um, so one of the visuals I'm thinking of now is farmers markets, right? So that's sort of, sort of promoting something right now is take your kids out to the farmers market, just taking the panoply of like all the things that are going to be coming to the fore, like the fruits, vegetables, the aromas, get the kids to touch these sort of things, and you're not going to eat it, but sort of identify it, become knowledgeable of what the foods are. And, you know, we used to do a thing where we spin the globe and we'd pick a point on the map, and then we'd try to make a food that was native to that part of the world. So that's the other essence of the evolution of the diet. It is as variable as there are people, right? So whether you live in the Inuit in the northern hemispheres or in the middle Americas, the access to food is varied based on what can grow.
Right, I think, the whole word is behind you, and something else, we've done, we as, like, created language, created stories, created, assumptions based on, you know, the word Whole Foods coins with a very large conglomerate grocery store, which implies that, like, to get whole foods, you have to go here, and we all know that there's a certain financial barrier. So I think, just thinking out loud, for those, especially also in areas where their closest grocery store is 30, 40, 45 minutes away, maybe the quick shop is like the dollar store, with some food. So, like, I think, a big part of the sharing and really limited access is we've we've created stories right now in our time that, like, may not be of truth, and creating assumptions based. And then, like, if you have to travel far or you have to make cognizant decisions to procure and, like, have the food, and you're time starved because we're in this rush society, it's like you're like triple whammied, to maybe get out of the gate. So, like, thinking of some ideas, right? Or, starting with frozen veggies, the beans, rice, right? Like, those are all things that can be batched, procured. Um, and then visiting or making an outing with your family to go to the farmer's market to, like, make it an adventure and bring those into your homes. So you're really like, really, I think, is skip over the over processed kid food, the easily accessible food to make it quick feed. Like, how do you bring and integrate, like, those intentional moments in your week to prepare for this?
A lot of it will, at the end of the day, be individual, right? Some people are more motivated than others. So one of the things I'm hoping to do is to get into the space of the prenatal time before mothers deliver, to start talking about not only breastfeeding, but just about nutritional needs, and that what happens throughout your life and then preparing to become pregnant does impact that future life.
Right.
And during the pregnancy, it's very critical. And then going forward, we're role models. So what we do will play a very obvious role, but also one that's not seen, right? So all eyes are on us when we're parents, whether we're, uh, you know,
Aware of it or not.
exactly. And so, you know, our little idiosyncrasies become their little idiosyncrasies. So I think it's the nature of humanity, right? Which
Right.
is sort of a fun part, and so I think it takes work, right? So I think the essence is it's just not going to happen um, unless you say you want to, make the decision to do some of these things. And I think, for some it's just insurmountable. It's like too much. Like, oh my
Right.
gosh, how
So,
do I ever
like,
do this?
and our goal, break it down. So I think, I mentioned it, but, like, there are available things that are healthy, that aren't processed, that you can buy in bulk. And then, like, simple snacks, like apples with peanut butter, right? Like, very back to the basics. And we don't have to have those expensive gushers. I mean, snack food and quick food is actually really pricey. But we don't take the time to do that reflection sometimes because of our rushed behavior. So just really taking a pulse and plan.
And it's a hard thing when the marketing and what the supermarkets provide make it you walk in quickly. I remember going to work earlier, jumping the Giant Eagle, which is our local food chain. And one of the kids of his mom was walking out with the hot Cheetos, first thing in the morning on the way to school. And I was a little, you know, it was unfortunate, but I mean, didn't say anything to them, and it's just the sort of like, well, getting out of the house, she's got to go to work. She's got 101 things to do. I totally understand the dilemma. And we've not made it a priority to make this food available. Yes, we have free breakfast, but then that whole food system as well is leans towards the dairy and a lot of what's easily accessible. So that's a whole nother
And
space that we're gonna have to unpack at later dates of
Yeah, and speaking from experience, like, having 6 children and, I call them the elders and littles, and just, like, because I'm very intentional, and I think about this all the time, so I know I'm different. Um, when I think back of, like, how they eat now and, like, now that I'm so aware, I have, a situation where, it's very easy for our children to become latched to crave ultra processed food. So like even if you're innocently throwing them those chicken nuggets or fruit snacks or like yogurt tubes at the very beginning, that starts to like send a lot of neurons to create a lot of desire, to create a lot of tantrums if they're not received. So like to any parents listening and having that extremely picky eater or selective eaters, um there's a reason for it, and so it will probably take a little bit more intentionality and reflection and, strong will maybe, to kind of pivot and to get them out of that craving because 'cause they're fundamentally and we talked about ultra processed food, and that's probably a whole episode, but, like, you become addicted. So,
right.
I
I
guess
mean, we are creatures of the habits, right? And so I think that's what hap I mean, these are sort of things that's another book that, sort of reading that sort of our default mechanisms are to create things that make it so we don't have to work through each and every thought process, right? So we become accustomed to speaking and doing things. So if we had to learn how to cut the food with our knife each time, like I should do this, brush your teeth, you don't have to think about it. You pick up the toothbrush and you automatically do it. So these automatisms become our habits. Same thing happens with our eating, right? So in order to change some of these habits, we have to really, and we can't expect the kids to be motivated themselves yet, right? So they don't have any self-awareness for them, doesn't hit until they're 7 or 8. So the first 3 to 4 years, but those first, years are so valuable in giving us the opportunity to sort of help them to develop some good habits, which means we have to be trying to do so. It's like not do as I do, do as I say, it's not going to work well. But just getting back to the whole food plant-based diet and recommendations, one of the things that I noticed when I moved in that direction, because I ate everything growing up, and was how I felt, right? So the difference I felt was one, food is energy. And so we do eat because we need this energy source, and carbohydrates are the number one source of energy, not protein. So that sort of me was sort of like a little eye-opening to sort of like drill down to sort of understanding nutrition, because even in medicine, I think we've alluded to this before, we get very little nutritional training and education. Still to this date, it's not high on the list of what medical students are learning. And it's sort of unfortunate because most of our diseases, especially today, are diseases of affluence, and they're related to our diet. So if we look at hundreds of years ago, we didn't have all these processed foods. So we didn't have a lot of diabetes or cancer or things. Not that they didn't happen, but to the raging numbers that we're seeing in society today, the diet is a number one proponent of our health and wellness and of all the diseases we're seeing. So, you know, it's sort of our way to sort of offset this is to change how we eat. Now that's monumental, right? If I could make it just happen, that would be great, but there's no magic wand for me to do that.
And also it's, like, it's not truthfully, the word diet has been exploited and has a negative connotation. So, like, then it's a lifestyle. And then so that has been kind of brought up and then burned. And so, one could think it's a framework, right? It's like it's an awareness of what is, and then taking the right steps, or really, thoughts, words create thought for others, right? So, planting those seeds and creating the intentionality of it. So, like, and we talked about a little bit, but we have to really balance information because we haven't heard it before with this intuition. And we're kind of at this, like, pivotal moment. Like, there's this extreme amount of information coming from all spaces. And here we are creating more information with the true, altruistic vision that, we're going to plant some seeds, right? To, like, allow them to think through some of the things we're sharing. But so how do we, help families trust themselves again? And I think that really is a big objective of ours, is really bringing the trust back to individuals to then make, sound decisions based on what we share and then they receive
Right.
from others.
Right. I think that just is empowering. I mean, my goal as a pediatrician, as I've evolved, and I feel like I'm learning every day from every family that I meet, the interactions we've had, the conversations. I mean, I enjoy these. I've got a number of families that, are pursuing different things. They come with their knowledge, and I don't know it all. And I'm always open to learn more things, because it's just impossible for me to have a recipe for wellness for everybody who walks through the door. And what we're doing in pediatrics, we're identifying, we're doing some quantification because we're a numbers society. So we do height, weights, and measurements and all sorts of stuff. But I'm less concerned, about the BMI. Of course, that's a sounding board for, like, oh my gosh. And, when they started doing that in the schools, it was a dread for me, because this was just another way to sort of plant a seed of, like, shame and blame, that this kid's coming home with a BMI marker and they come to the office. It's like, the school just told me this. What are you going to do? Or what do we do? And the reality is, boy, unpacking that one isn't going to change. I don't have a prescription that you can take, amoxicillin for 10 days. And guess what? Your BMI is going to be better. Right. But, we're, we have, I think, an honorable maybe way of wanting to do something good, but we don't always understand what the impacts of those are going to be, when we put some of those sort of things into place. And I think it's just helped us to identify that, I didn't need a BMI to tell me that in my career, the weight gain in society has been, 20, 30, 40%, right? Look at kids in the mid 80s to the kids in the mid 90s to the kids in this decade. The average weight is just higher. I mean, there are some people who are blessed just with high metabolism, whatever. They're lean families and they stay lean, right? But the majority, that's just not happening. And so I don't like to get caught up in, okay, that sort of detail of, like, you've got to add BMI, but I do
Right.
address the bigger issues of, like, well, how can we just talk about eating healthy and making good choices?
Can't help but so, like, a lot of, my space, I work in the electric utility industry, and I've been, you know, creating knowledge, absorbing knowledge, and now I have this, like, desire to share. But my point is, this whole idea of creating metrics in our industry, drives certain behaviors. So, like, just this whole BMI, which, I was I don't know, a victim of, right? Like, it was a number that, like, got put into my head at a very young age as I was developing as a woman, and I always, like, silently have struggled with this image of what it was and what it meant and who I was. And so, it took 25 plus years to break through that. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. So, I have daughters, and so, like, I hate the BMI. Like, I almost want to tell you, don't tell us, and you don't. So thank you. But so metrics can really be created for good, but very quickly could pivot to the reality. And so another area that I got to speak to a bunch of executives around engineering and operation leadership. And I opened the panel with this idea of knowledge, experience, and wisdom. We are in this massive space of information that one could say is not information is knowledge, right? So facts, data, and information. So what we learn from our books, our teachers, and the internet. For instance, I know an apple, based on what you shared and what I can read, is a source of fiber, vitamins, and antioxidants, right? Like that, right? That's one could debate the truth, but that's a
Right.
whole other. um,
But
then
I
there's
get
the
there.
yeah, then there's the experience of like, I notice when I eat an apple in the afternoon, I feel energized, and a little less likely to crave sugar, right? Like that has become a thing. And now I know to pair it with like some nuts, and it's like a perfect pick me up. That's an experience. And then the kicker is like the wisdom is when we start to integrate those. Like I keep apples on the counters so my kids see them, and then I slice them and I offer them, right? And I create a shared snack, right? There's like a wisdom that now I'm, providing to my child. And I think that's what you and I are fundamentally
Right.
doing here, right? Like we have this enormous amount of knowledge, we have a significant amount of experience, and we just would like to share some wisdom.
No,
And then
no,
you take it for what it is, like
no, I mean,
um
that's what, I mean, as I moved into this space, I always we liked having our kids' friends over, right? In our house, I'm more of the cutter upper, right? So I cut up the carrots and the celery and all of the vegetables. And, if you put them out, and that is one thing, like a whole food may not be appealing to the kids, but you cut them up. I would wash, one of my son's friends is like a blueberry holic. So if I have blueberries, they'll be gone. But that's the thing. The kids ate them, right? These kids were teenagers. They come to the house. We didn't put out like tons of chips and whatever. We put out the
right.
fruit and vegetables and cut them up. Maybe I'd have some hummus or whatever, but they would eat them. I mean, it wasn't like they were whining about, oh, and the other thing we didn't have was soda, right? So that's the other thing. Juices and sodas just were not um, readily available. And they were the sort of treat. And to this day, I don't see my kids suffering or yearning that sort of thing. But, it's out there. And I mean, growing up, there was something to that taste and flavor palette, right? So it is something we have to learn how to sort of balance, right? I think that's one of our other takeaways is common sense and balance, right? So I think I tell everybody, you don't have to be a vegan. I just prefer not being identified as the food you eat. You're a person, right? And whole food, plant-based eating is sort of a way of life. And Mediterranean diet, I mean, we've just tried to sort of create these sort of spaces where this is how to eat, that's how to eat. In different parts of the world, you know, that's how what food was accessible, and the Mediterranean diet tends to seem to promote healthy living, but it's also about proportionality, um, and they cook their food. It's the things we've just been talking about, right? It's preparing the food, eating real whole foods. I mean, they do eat all sorts of things, fish and meat and whatnot, but it's, the amount. I mean, our diets have increased, on the statistics, it's gone up by 25%. So the average diet was 2,000 calories a day. Now it's 2,500 and even more, you know. So the things that, as far as things that parents can do from the get-go is what I've identified is smaller serving plates, right? So we've gone from a 6 or 8 inch plate to a 10 to a 12-inch plate, and every couple inches adds 500 calories to a plate. So and it's a visual. So if you say, okay, I love the big plate, but you serve a little portion that's
Right.
appropriate in the middle, and people don't feel like I've gotten what I deserve because I want the whole plate. So we're in this not only clean plate club, but whole plate, right? So
Right.
if you go to a salad size plate or an 8 or 9 inch plate, you will reduce your calorie intake by probably 5 or more 100 calories or more. So it's a simple way of not even eating what you're eating. So you don't have to change what you're eating. You just eat less and you still get as much satisfaction, and you won't get as many calories.
There was a lot there. So I know you have a book. Would you like as we wrap this up?
Yeah. So the
I was
third,
like, I mean, I want to say, but there's a lot
yeah,
there. Like, there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom that you just bestowed on
yeah.
us.
Just trying to do a little bit more of that because
Yeah,
I think it's one of the things that we want to try to do is to make it as simple as possible, right? So I
right.
don't think everybody always say brain surgery, but to be a good brain surgeon, you need to be, fed well, on your game, right? And the things I would take away from, part of this common sense is, not only to eat food, not too much, mostly plants, but you should be satisfied. And you shouldn't, like, if you eat a good meal, you should be energized. So, one things that I've taken away from some of the stuff I've been doing is that if I eat a meal and I feel like, oh, I got to take a nap, that is not a sign of a good meal. So if people are at work and they like come back from lunch and they're like, "Oh, I need my nap after," like, I don't know what you did, but that was not a good, nutritious, energizing meal. So I
Right.
think that's maybe you ate too much, but maybe what you ate. Um, so I think that's one of the things is that we should know that our kids should be energized. We should be energized by the food we eat. Um, so the whole book is the one by T. Colin Campbell. The other book that I've found is Devoured. Great title. How what we eat defines who we are. So that's a little bit to
Very,
unpack there. But I think, there are a lot of people in this space, helping us to sort of understand, this is about human behavior. I mean, at the end of the day, my job is a lot of psychology, of understanding what's going on, helping parents to sort of create their space of like taking their attributes and, creating a healthy, loving environment in their home.
I love it. So maybe today it really was about common sense, right? Exactly what we need more of. Feeding our families doesn't have to be perfect. Um, it just needs to be present. And it needs to be whole. Yeah. So also I think I'll just add rooted in love and not fear or shame. So if something to our listeners, we're gonna wrap up, resonated with you, just take one small step. We listed quite a bunch, but the tools are already within you, and that's really what we want to unlock during our sessions here. So thank you for joining Illuminating Being, and thank you, Dr. Summers.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Always a pleasure. Look forward to the next session.
And for anyone that is listening, subscribe. It helps us, and then also share because we're going to continue to really explore what it means to be awake and be intentional with what we eat and how we eat and who we become. So
Beautiful.
thanks.
Okay. See you next time.